G'day, mate. Luke Ford here. I want to talk about your favorite movies of 2019. My favorite movie was the Clint Eastwood movie Richard Jewell, based on the true story of the hero security guard Richard Jewell, who in the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta discovered a bomb and insisted that law enforcement pay attention to it when they really just wanted to ignore it, and he saved many, many lives. Then he ended up getting libeled by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and libeled by the FBI as their main suspect. And I love this movie. So I liked Midway. I liked 2017. Two good war movies. And I guess Parasite was probably the best movie that I saw in 2019. But Richard Jewell is my favorite. So just to review some of the facts of that story, here's the 60
Minutes
stories.
Rewind.
In any high-profile federal investigation of a terrorist act like the September 11th attack on America, there are bound to be successes and failures, promising leads that pan out, but also innocent people swept up in the dragnet. One American who knows all about that is Richard Jewell, who was falsely accused of a terrorist act back in 1996. The setting off of a bomb at the Atlanta Olympics. In a very public investigation by the FBI and the Atlanta police, Jewell was branded the chief suspect in the bombing. We got to know Richard Jewell back in 1996, but it wasn't till recently that we realized how deeply affected he was by his ordeal and why it's been so difficult for him to recover from what happened 5 years ago. It all began when the bomb exploded in Atlanta's Centennial Olympic Park just after 1 a.m. on July 27, 1996. Richard Jewell was working as a private security guard there, and he helped escort many of the spectators to safety. He was called a hero. And then everything changed. You may not want to go back and relive it, but how did it happen? You were a hero, and then you were a villain.
And it happened like that.
And what started the fiasco?
The headline of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that afternoon,
Which
pretty
said?
much started the whirlwind.
FBI suspects hero guard may have planted bomb.
Linwood is Richard Jewell's lawyer.
Hero in quotation marks, sarcastic. Banner headline that was read to the world verbatim as breaking news on CNN.
And then, of course, AP picks it up, and it just mushrooms.
The story leaked to the media was that Jewell wasn't a hero at all, but was himself the bomber, who perversely sought publicity for saving people from the explosion.
Richard Jewell fits the profile of the lone bomber. Absolutely false.
Not true.
But everybody then assumed that this bizarre character, as he was being portrayed, had decided that this was going to be his 15 minutes of fame, that he was going to set up this situation where he would literally bomb a park and then claim to be a hero.
The FBI put Jewell under round-the-clock surveillance and conducted a very public search of his apartment, all of it broadcast on live television. It was not until many weeks later the FBI finally acknowledged Jewell was not a suspect in the bombing. Did Louis Freeh or anyone from the FBI ever call you up and say, Mr. Jewell, we made a mistake, we're sorry?
No, sir. Nobody's ever called me, written me a letter, sent me an email, called any of my attorneys.
In 5 years?
No, sir.
So Richard Jewell, in fact, saved over 100 innocent people's lives that night, and no one has ever bothered to even say, thank you, Mr. Jewell. Not the city of Atlanta, not the state of Georgia, not the Olympic Committee in Atlanta, not the International Committee.
How do you account for that?
Because he's so tainted that even when he was exonerated, no one still wanted to really be identified with him.
I don't understand it.
It's the taint that will live with this man forever, because he will forever still be identified as a man that the public believed bombed the park.
Linwood, you told me last night that you thought he was guilty.
I did. I actually believed what I saw on television and what I read in the newspapers. And I thought that the FBI had their man, and their man was Richard Jewell.
I'm going to tell you something, Mr. Wallace. There's 6, 7 people in this room with us right now.
Yeah.
And I don't care what they say now. That first week, everybody in this room thought I was the bomber.
That's true. Including me.
Yes, sir.
When I first met him a few weeks after the bombing, Jewell was still a suspect, and he is right, I did think he might indeed be the bomber. But I changed my mind after he described to me back then what had happened that night in July when he noticed a suspicious-looking package under a park bench and pointed it out to a federal ATF agent.
He was laying flat on his stomach, and he was undoing the top of the bag with his hand, and he was doing his flashlight like this, and all of a sudden he just froze. What really made me think this is bad, is there was like a little line in training that they taught you that would instill in you, and it was, if you see an ATF agent running, you better be in front of him.
So did you start to run too?
No, sir.
You stayed there within 10 yards of where the package was?
Yes, sir. We were just concerned with getting the people as far away as we could.
Okay, so Richard Jewell was a hero, but because he was white and because he lived with his mum, it was okay to mock him and to profile him. So this whole FBI profiling thing is just nuts. That this idea, it's been made into countless movies and TV shows that the FBI has all these great psychological insights into what makes killers tick. Not nearly as accurate as racial profiling, but as our elites keep telling us, racial profiling is very, very bad, and psychological profiling is very, very good, even though one is more effective than the other. So Steve Saylor writes, Richard Jewell is director Clint Eastwood's well-acted, solidly script biopic about the racial profiling fiasco that undermined the 1996 Atlanta Olympics bombing investigation. So yeah, this was insane racial profiling. The FBI monomaniacally targeted an innocent rent-a-cop for being a frustrated white man, then leaked his name to the press despite never having any evidence against him. So this brings up a much bigger question. Should we automatically have respect for people in uniform? And I think many, perhaps most white people do. We just automatically have respect for people in uniform, whether they're in the military, whether they're firefighters, whether they're police, whether they're FBI, they're law enforcement, they're military. We just automatically treat them with respect. But I think we need to get over that. Certainly, you should always treat people with respect if they have a gun. Law enforcement frequently has a gun, and shouldn't treat them overtly with disrespect. But treating someone with respect and regarding them with respect are two different things. You may very well treat your boss with respect, but regard him as an a-hole. Okay, and so I think we have to look at people in uniform as just people like everyone else, plumbers and dentists and lawyers. Some are actually worthy of respect. Some are worthy of respect in certain instances. Some should be distrusted in all instances, but feels like we got to stop automatically treating people in uniform with respect, including police, including firefighters, regarding them with respect. We need to treat them with respect, treat everybody who has a weapon with respect, treat everybody, particularly who can hurt you, with respect, but that doesn't mean we should regard them with respect or that we should automatically put people on a pedestal simply because they have an official title.
As quickly as we could.
Can you stop for a second, please? Did you turn around? Where were you at 1 o'clock on that morning? What kind of questions were they asking?
That summer, Jewell was besieged by the media wherever he went. And the FBI kept following him, too. When he went out for a drive, they were always there. Not just that one agent in the blue Jeep, but a whole FBI convoy which chased him on and off the interstate. A total of 5 or 6 FBI vehicles. The FBI also searched the home of Jewell's mother, Bobby. What'd they take out of your apartment?
They took Richard's guns, which he has always hunted. He deer hunts. Then they took all of my Tupperware. I mean, every piece of Tupperware. They took 22 of my Walt Disney tapes.
And the TV cameras were always there.
I felt like it was a movie production. Every light, there must have been 20 satellite trucks in our parking lot. I'm living a nightmare.
I don't know if you ever saw this.
No, sir, I didn't see it.
As the weeks went by, the torment by the media turned to ridicule. Jay Leno called you Unidoofus. A federal agent was quoted as saying you were Unibubba. Your mother was called the Unimama.
Yes, sir.
In late October of '96, the U.S. Attorney finally wrote this letter saying Jewell was not considered a target of the federal criminal investigation. A statement delivered to one of Jewell's lawyers at this out-of-the-way coffee shop far away from the TV cameras. And unlike the public FBI investigation of Jewell, there was no FBI press conference. Jewell and his attorney Lynn Wood say the FBI was simply too embarrassed.
Much of the media has denounced Clint's movie, writes Steve Saylor, for casting aspersions upon America's noble deep state, just because our beloved intelligence community has a lamentable track record of going off on wild goose chases against innocent citizens, then inviting the press to pile on to turn their daily existences into living hells is no reason, to make a movie about it. Some bits of history are best swept under the rug. The New Yorker, for example, is hallucinatory with rage about the film. Quote, yet paradoxically, there is another woman, an ultra-competent and accomplished woman who's never mentioned and never seen, and yet is obliquely, perhaps unintentionally implied throughout the movie. That is Hillary Rodham Clinton. No, actually, the movie's not at all about Hillary. Wow. Go back here to 60 Minutes.
We now know a lot more than we knew at the time. We sat down and talked with you initially. We know, for example, that the FBI was interested in Richard, but had really not decided whether Richard Jewell was a possible suspect or a potentially valuable witness. But before they could execute their plan, the banner headline gets published, and now all of a sudden, the FBI's got to come to grips with Richard Jewell in a public investigation. And that changed, I think, the whole approach that the FBI took.
Jewell was originally planning to sue the FBI, but eventually decided it would be futile to sue the federal government. He did sue a number of media organizations, and several settled. NBC, CNN, the New York Post, and an ABC radio station, for a total believed to be in excess of $2 million. The Atlanta Journal and Constitution, though, has refused to settle with Jewell, and 5 years after the bombing, the paper is still fighting the case in court. Attorney Peter Canfield is defending the newspaper.
Plaintiff has consistently claimed that he should never have been a suspect of the FBI in the bombing. But he's never sued the FBI. Instead, he's asserted that the Journal-Constitution is to blame for all of his troubles by being the first to accurately report that he had, in fact, become the investigation's focus.
What he's saying is that the paper was accurately reporting what it had been told, that Richard Jewell was a suspect.
Look, call him a suspect. Put it in your newspaper. You will not be sued for calling Richard Jewell a suspect. You will be sued when you publish in your newspaper that he's a villain, a bad man, he fit the profile of the lone bomber of the park, he sought publicity, and he's like Wayne Williams, a convicted murderer of children. Put that in your newspaper, and you will be sued. That's what the Atlanta Journal and Constitution said about this man.
The story will continue after this.
Okay.
704.
For the past 5 years, Richard Jewell has been trying to put his life back together. He did manage to find a job as a police officer in a small community. He lost 65 pounds, got married last September, a private affair, no TV cameras, no chance. And Jewell is still just as angered at what the media did to him as he was back in 1996. I want to show you what you said then and get your reaction to it.
Okay.
Let's take a look.
People will never forget my name. People will be 90 years old that were at the Olympic Games and go, Do you remember when that bomb went off, that Jewell fella that they accused of that?
The Richard Jewell story did not have a happy ending. He died in 2007 of diabetes. So Jewell was initially acclaimed a hero for discovering a suspicious backpack under a bench at Atlanta's downtown Centennial Park. So what's the story with downtown Atlanta? Well, crime is rampant. The murder rate is among the nation's worst. White flight, congested roadways have taken their toll. City's core has dramatically shrunk, left Atlanta as the hole in a donut with a population of just 450,000 in a metro area of more than 4 million. That's from the 2019 book, The Suspect in Olympic Bombing, FBI, the Media, and Richard Jewell, the Man Caught in the Middle. So the 1996 Atlanta Olympics were about the worst run Olympics in modern history, the most inefficient. You had people getting on a bus to go to the Olympics, and then the bus driver getting lost and then just quitting and leaving people stranded. You'll have an inch of snow and Atlanta will ground to a halt. Okay, incredibly incompetent. Not sure why Atlanta, Baltimore, Detroit, some of these cities are just so incompetent. It must be because they have Democrats. Must be because they have Democrats running things, right? That's the kind of thing. That's the only common denominator that comes to mind. When the FBI back in 1996 couldn't come up with a clue about who the terrorist was, they began to obsess over the notion that Richard Jewell fit the profile of the lone white male, wants so much to be the good guy that he becomes the bad guy. The FBI then leaked this wild surmise to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, to explain to its readers, this profile generally includes a frustrated white man who is a former police officer, a member of the military or police wannabe who seeks to become a hero. So the 1990s were the peak of the prestige of the FBI's fad of criminal profiling the perpetrators of exotic incidents, which was seen as much more moral and scientific than the despised practice of racially profiling crack dealers. So racial profiling relies upon common stereotypes about common criminals, that the black youth standing on the corner who dresses and acts like a drug dealer might indeed be a drug dealer, tends to work because stereotypes are almost always statistically true on average. But the entire subject of black crime is just so depressing and repetitious that everybody officially pretends that racial profiling just can't possibly work. By contrast, the much more respectable form of profiling tries to predict the personalities of felons of glamour crimes like serial murders and Olympic bombings. So we've had many movies made about the genius FBI profilers who solve mysteries by getting inside the twisted minds of psycho killers. Unfortunately, as Malcolm Gladwell scoffed in 2007, it's not a triumph of forensic analysis, it's just a party trick. The unusual crimes that obsess the press are by definition unusual, thus their profilers must draw upon much smaller sample sizes than routine crimes like crack dealing. And in a more important case, the 9/11 anthrax murders drove the American intelligence community so nuts that it started arguing for invading Iraq. The FBI spent 6 years tormenting bioweapons expert Stephen Hatfill before paying him about $5 million for their abuse. Okay, I'll play a little bit more here from 60 Minutes.
Remember that? And people will be going, yeah, I remember that. Can you believe all that? It will never end, sir.
And it has not ended, you say?
No, sir, it hasn't. And it won't. I mean, I know that. You know.
You'd be surprised to know how many people come up to me and will still nudge me and say, hey, so tell me, did he really do it? That question is still asked.
You go to a grocery store and you hear people whisper your name. They stare at you. They point at you. Driving home from work, you're always looking in your rearview mirror. If you see a car there, the same car for a long time, you turn off even though it's not your turn to see if that car follows you. You drive a different way home every night.
5 years later?
Yeah.
Despite...
When you come out to get in your car in the morning, you walk around it and look under it. You look around the parking lot to see if somebody's sitting in a car.
Richard, wait a minute. It turns out that you were a hero, not the bomber.
Sir, I've never been treated like a hero. Never. I don't know what a hero's treated like, but my mother and I have never been treated like that.
Well, wait a second. You were, in fact, a hero.
Well, thank you.
You realized what was going down.
Well, I did my job that night.
That's correct.
And
undoubtedly saved a lot of lives in doing it.
well, thank you, sir. Not many people say that. Most people say you're the ex-suspect.
Still.
Yes, sir.
Okay, looking at some interesting things on Twitter. Yoram Hazony tweets, the Tories should have defended Gan Kaczynski, smeared by a leftist press, as Roger Scruton was last year. Instead, they dishonorably turned on him. Conservatives must stop believing the lies the leftist press tells about us. And Yoram Hazony responds in The Spectator about his National Conservatism conference. So I'll throw in a link here. What does Yoram Hazony have to say? This week's National Conservatism Conference in Rome was an important meeting of national conservatives from all over the world. Sadly, it has been sullied by disgusting attacks from British Liberals against the Conservative MP Daniel Kaczynski for agreeing to take part. Publications from BuzzFeed to The Guardian pounced on Kaczynski's decision to appear alongside European leaders such as Hungary's Viktor Orban and Italy's Matteo Salvini as proof of anti-Semitic, racist and homophobic beliefs held not only by Daniel but the political party to which he belongs, the Conservative Party. Oy vey.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the 60 Minutes piece. Here's a podcast, History of the 1990s.
Every 4 years, for 2 weeks, the world is united as it cheers on the greatest athletes to go faster, higher, and stronger at the Summer Olympics. In 1996, millions cheered when Muhammad Ali took the stage at the opening ceremony in Atlanta to light the Olympic cauldron. His body had been slowed by Parkinson's, but with shaking hands, he managed to ignite both the flame and the spirit of the 100th Olympic Games. The Olympic spirit burned bright that night and continued until 8 days later when tragedy struck. On this episode, we look back at the deadly bombing that rocked the 1996 Atlanta Summer Olympics and the man wrongfully placed at the center of it all, Richard Jewell. I'm Kathy Kinzora, and this is the history of the 90s.
Okay, let's get back to Yoram Hazony here. He published a book on nationalism that got sterling reviews last year. The Tories subsequently proved themselves to be utterly witless in the face of the attack, but my primary concern is that hysterical attempts like this to decree guilt by association and thereby shut down serious discussion should be called out for what they are and held to account. This matters because the effect is to anathematize a serious conservative idea and the many academic students and activists who came together in Rome to discuss it. If we routinely give in to witch hunts on Twitter, the legitimate public exchange of ideas on controversial subjects will become impossible. Astonishingly, the attacks on Kaczynski neglected to name any of the conference organizers or sponsoring organizations. Why smear a conference without naming the organizers? Because the organizers are prominent mainstream conservatives with well-known reputations. Naming them would undermine the premise that Kaczynski recklessly attended a gathering of racist anti-Semites and homophobes. Claim that a conference whose organizers include Jews was in any way anti-Semitic is absurd. The conference committee included myself, an Orthodox Jew, and Ophir Ivry. Our Herzl Institute in Jerusalem was a co-sponsor. Kaczynski and other participants all spoke in front of an Israeli logo, among others, featuring a Star of David and Hebrew text. Claim of homophobia is equally absurd. The conference was addressed by several well-known gay men. On the attacks on Daniel Kaczynski, you would think he went to Rome to praise the wonders of fascism and came. In fact, he came to discuss Brexit with other concerned political and academic figures. And Yoram says, we will not apologize for inviting controversial figures. I agree with Douglas Murray that governments and parties are being called far right when they are not, and whole countries and movements are being anathematized when they must in fact be partners in the years ahead. Okay, so Steve Saylor responded this. Well, Jeff Garcia, what do you think about the cancel culture issue when it comes to people to our right? For example, Peter Brimlow and Steve Saylor strike me as authentic nationalist conservative voices, but I don't see them invited in your tent. Just curious how you think. Yoram says, I keep saying the same things, Jeff. You must be tired of hearing them by now. I'm not interested in canceling anyone. It's despicable. The movement I'm organizing is for nationalists, not globalists and not racialists. Those fellows can organize their own tents. And Steve Saylor says, do you require that nationalists also be science denialists to be let into your club? And Yoram Hazony responds, no, that's not the issue here. It's straight political theory. A nation is not a race. Well, actually it is. Nationalists build their political theory on nations. Racialists build their political theory on races. Two different things. Nonsense. There is no nation without this shared belief in a common bloodline. Steve Saylor writes, would you allow Charles Murray to give a talk at your organization's meeting about his new book, Human Diversity, the Biology of Gender, Race, and Class? I haven't talked to Charles about nationalism, so I don't know his views, but again, biology isn't political theory. Well, actually, it is. There's a whole field of political biology. These are two different levels of explanation. You can't reduce one to the other, says Yoram. Steve Saylor replies, if Charles Murray wanted to give a speech at one of your Edmund Burke Society meetings, it would consist of half his agreeing with your political views and half his promoting his brand new book, Human Diversity, the Biology of Gender, Race, and Class. Would you let him? Yoram, hi, you made me laugh, Steve. When that proposal is submitted to the conference committee, we'll discuss and decide. I don't know the answer to your hypothetical. And there's a tweet response by Not the Midwest. I would have thought Charles Murray's theses in Coming Apart would be right up Yoram Hazony's national conservative ally. Based on Hazony's accusation that Nathan Coffness defends race science, I suspect Charles Murray wouldn't get the invite because Hazony considers him a race scientist. Looking at Steve Saylor's Twitter feed, I haven't really been following the Kobe, Gayle King, Snoop Dogg, Susan Wright diss-off, but apparently I should have been. I'm looking forward to the New York Times op-ed about how ultimately the blame in all this lies with straight white men such as Donald Trump. It's a pretty good question that he posed to Yoram Hazony. Do you require that nationalists also be science denialists to be let into your club? Peter Brimlow comments, note that Yoram Hazony does not give a straight answer to Steve Saylor's question. Torin responds, I bet he would allow him to talk about sex differences since God made that. I'm not sure how God's tribes line up with races. If, as Hazony thinks, nations require the dominance of a particular ethnic group, then why does he have a coherent objection to Peter Brimlow's desire to maintain the dominance of what he calls the historic American nation? Why is it okay for Amy Wax to make a case for that, but not for Peter? Okay. Go to a review of the movie by Trevor Lynch. 2019 was the year of the frustrated white loser living at home with his mum. First there was Todd Phillips' Joker, an origin story of Batman's most memorable nemesis. Then came Clint Eastwood's Richard Jewell, true story of a Georgia security guard who discovered the Centennial Olympic bomb in 1986, and of course Jewell notified law enforcement and saved many.
A podcast about a decade that changed the world. On July 26, 1996, the security guard responsible for watching over a sound and light tower at the center of Centennial Olympic Park in Atlanta arrived a half hour early for his overnight shift. It was the 8th day of the Summer Games, and the park, with its pavilions, stages, and exhibits, was a hub of activity. It was the crown jewel for the Atlanta Organizing Committee. a place where people could come together.
And the chat wants to know why President Donald Trump doesn't give Kevin Michael Grace the Presidential Medal of Freedom instead of Rush Limbaugh. Good question.
And feel the Olympic spirit for free. Like every law enforcement or security job he ever had, this guard took his position at the Olympics very seriously. He was alert to any signs of trouble. When he clocked in that night, he had no idea just how much trouble lurked around the corner. He had no idea that his life would never be the same.
So, Richard Jewell's actions saved dozens of lives. He was hailed as a hero, then he was framed as a suspect by the FBI and the media and hounded mercilessly. Why? Because he fit the profile of a mad bomber, a frustrated white male who lived at home with his mother. So both leftists and the alt-right tried to meme Joker into a symbol of white male rage and alienation. Did this long before the movie came out, based largely on hearsay. But Joker was not about a charismatic criminal mastermind. He was just a pathetic, vacant, mentally ill loser. Nobody would want to identify with him, not even pathetic, vacant, mentally ill losers, says Trevor Lynch. Beyond that, there's nothing especially insightful about Joker's diagnosis of the modern malaise. Richard Jewell is one of the best movies of 2019 with a brilliant script, excellent performances, and an important message. I agree completely. It is infinitely superior to Joker, which I have not seen, because it shows the true cause of white male rage and alienation. Richard Jewell is not a nutcase dumped into the gutter by Reaganism. He's simply an ordinary white man who fit the profile. No, not the FBI profile, the hostile elite profile. Richard Jewell is the kind of white man that the American system increasingly blames for everything that is wrong with our society while depending upon these men to keep the society going. The profile, authored by people who regard white Americans as contemptible aliens, is propagated through 1,000 movies, TV shows, books, songs, and bits of journalism. Richard Jewell is a fat, white, Christian, heterosexual Georgia redneck with a heavy Southern accent. He likes hunting guns. He drives a pickup truck. He believes in the American system. He looks up to authority, especially men in uniform. That's a mistake. I think we need to stop looking up to authority, treat it with respect because they have guns and the power to hurt us, but only accord our true respect and only truly look up to people when they deserve it. We got to treat people in uniform on an individual basis. Richard Jewell wants a career in law enforcement because he wants to protect people. He's a kind-hearted, observant, attentive to the needs of others, obviously desires to be liked. He's a pro-social virtues, but he's also somewhat pathetic. Assholes and bullies regard him as an easy target, but he doesn't seem to be especially bitter, although he has good cause to be. I vividly remember the Richard Jewell case when he was being hailed as a hero in the media. They were obviously pained by the fact that he looked like a redneck from Central Casting. When they turned on him, it was with an obvious relief and relish, because he looked like the kind of guy they spend all their time sniggering at and vilifying. I know very well that if one or two of Jewell's traits had been altered, if he were thin or female or black or gay or a Yankee, the whole thing would have played out very differently. But Richard Jewell was everything the hostile elite loved to hate, and they almost lynched him for it. The opening scene of the movie Jewell is an office supply clerk in a law firm who strikes up an unlikely friendship with a young lawyer named Watson Bryant. Bryant is presented as a cocky Chad. Jewell is presented as observant to the point of nosiness and obsequious to the point of cringe. Viewers with modern leftist prejudices immediately dislike both men. Bryant is toxically masculine and Jewell has low self-esteem. But the film then brilliantly shows that Jewell's sharp eyes and punctilious desire to please others are what allows him to save lives. Bryant's cockiness allows him to save Jewell. So remember the DC sniper case? How the black police chief in Washington, D.C. says this is obviously the work of a white man, and all the profilers were telling us that this was obviously the work of a white man. Remember all those stories about how the DC sniper, work of a white man. So, Baltimore Sun, facing the Beltway snipers, profilers were dead wrong. December 15, 2002. Typical mass murder is extraordinarily ordinary, says James Allen Fox, author of books titled The Will to Kill, Making Sense of Senseless Murder, and Overkill, mass murder and serial killing exposed. He's also a teacher with a textbook, How to Work with the Media. Maintains a self-promoting website named Wolfman Productions, facilely exploiting his experience in both areas. Fox had previously managed to become a talking head on high-rated broadcast shows. During the tempestuous 3 weeks of this October 2002, while the media raged and the Beltway sniper rampaged, Fox, his colleagues, and competitors were truly in their glory. A cross-section of ordinary people were being slaughtered as they went their usual ways within range of an assault rifle. Turns out the DC sniper was a gay black Muslim. Well, the two of them. That was the only link connecting the crimes. 10 dead, 3 critically wounded. Pedestrians, motorists pumping gas, shoppers, a schoolboy, a bus driver. Little to supplement repetitious accounts of the continuing killings. Media offered limitless space for the speculations of self-aggrandizing experts on who done it. He stops and shoots and doesn't hear the screams, Fox dramatically divulged to his alarmed audience. Others enjoy squeezing the last breath from their victims. It makes it easier for him to psychologically to murder. Clifton Van Zandt, a former FBI profiler, agreed this is someone who is cold, who is calculating, who has the skills and doesn't care who they hurt. This could be a disgruntled employee who was fired. It's someone who is angry. Offered Brent Turvey, who wrote Criminal Profiling, an Introduction to Behavioral Evidence Analysis. So where does the Beltway sniper hang out? He's a weekday warrior. Even snipers have jobs. This is something white males do. That's what Van Sant, several others said. It's something that white males do. That was repetition of the experts. DC sniper was the work of white males, turned out to be 2 gay black Muslim dudes.
His name was Richard Jewell. He was 33 years old and lived with his mom Bobby in a small apartment in Atlanta. He had recently returned home to his mother after quitting his job as a security guard at Piedmont College in a small town a couple hours north of the city. The reason he left his previous job was that he took his position as a campus cop way too seriously. He was so eager that he even started patrolling areas off campus and pulling over people to issue warnings and citations. His boss was always telling him to relax, and after the college received one too many complaints about the security guard, he was put on probation. Jewell wasn't happy about it, so he decided to quit and move on. It was actually the second job that he had quit recently. Before working as a campus cop, he was a deputy sheriff in nearby Habersham County for 5.5 years.
Richard Jewell was a guileless but very eager young man who wanted desperately to be in law enforcement.
That's journalist Kevin Salwin, who recently co-wrote a book about Jewell called The Suspect.
Back to Trevor Lynch. Richard Jewell offers a scathing portrait of 2 of the hostile elite's enforcement arms, the mainstream media and the FBI, personified by Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter Kathy Scruggs, played by Olivia Wilde, and FBI agent Tom Shaw, fictional character played by John Hamm. Both are arrogant, ambitious, manipulative, and dishonest, and the system rewards them for this behavior. Team up to frame Richard Jewell as a terrorist and ruin his life because they are utterly indifferent to truth. See him as a perfect patsy, for he fits the profile of the system's #1 enemy. It personifies the America they want to destroy. They really are the enemies of the people. It's perfectly reasonable for the FBI to look into Richard Jewell. The bomber, Eric Rudolph, really was a frustrated white male. People really do plant bombs for attention. They also fake hate crimes for attention. They even make their own children sick. Jewell's record could be taken to show signs of this sort of malignant narcissism. But the FBI did not just look into Jewell, they tried to frame him. What's more, they tried to use his patriotism, respect for authority, and desire to do good to destroy him. Eastwood is brilliant to hone in on this point again and again. It is a lesson that all people need to learn. Should not automatically guard authority and people in uniform with reverence. This is not our country anymore. It is not our government. It is not our FBI. It is not our media. All of these are in the hands of our enemies. All the authoritative institutions of our society have been hollowed out, taken over, and repurposed to our dispossession and destruction. The chief tools this system uses to destroy us is our own patriotism and naive trust in the people who despise us. Richard Jewell repeatedly hammers home this moral obscenity. This is one of the most important lessons we can teach, for when people cease to trust the media and the government, when they see them as a hostile elite, as enemies of the people, that is the beginning of populism. Any decent white people cringe when they look at Richard Jewell. Part of that reaction is healthy because fat people are gross and unhealthy. Poor Richard Jewell died at the age of 44 from diabetes and heart disease. Stress of being framed as public enemy number one surely did not help. Most of these negative reactions simply spring from anti-white hatred internalized from the media, as well as the shameful American mania for exalting oneself by denigrating other white people. What saved Richard Jewell? He knew his rights and he asserted them. When he suspected he was being framed, he called a lawyer with genuine character, Watson Bryant. Jewell slipped up a few times because of his trust in the government, his unassertiveness, and his desire to help. Bryant was there for support, but in the end, Richard Jewell was sufficiently smart, suspicious, and self-assertive to walk away a free man. He is an example to us all. It would also be helpful if our people learned to see every reporter as a Kathy Scruggs and every cop as a Tom Shaw. There would be a lot fewer hit pieces and frame-ups. Richard Jewell is a populist classic, which is why the enemies of the people tried to bury it with silence or screeching. Everybody needs to see this superb film. Prevalent.
He says Jewell was a pretty good cop who loved what he did, but he just couldn't stop getting into trouble.
Oftentimes it was over his own driving. He was just a dreadful driver, got into accidents all the time. He drove a vehicle that had been banged up so often that it was referred to by his friends as the Deathmobile. And the trunk was bungeed down, but Richard could not kind of get out of his own way in many ways.
In one particularly spectacular crash, Jewell wrecked the sheriff's own car while pulling a prank on another officer. He hit a hydro pole and knocked out power to the neighboring area.
Yeah, let's look at some news footage from 1996.
They're dancing, everybody was having a great time, and they were about to start a new song, and bam, just a really loud noise, and then we saw people bleeding. There was steel hitting people, and we were rushing people to medical. Then we came out here, we cleared the park, we came out here, and this lady just fell over, and
Hey, what I got live here is a bomb. Atlanta.
Cobb County Police are still on guard at the entrance to the Monaco Station apartments, watching us as members of the media watch for any more signs of activity by federal investigators. Yesterday, lawmen made a second trip to Richard Jewell's former home in Habersham County. Agents bagged potential evidence, also removed paint samples.
Okay, let me get back to this podcast.
When he was demoted because of the stunt, Jewell decided it was time to move on. He dreamed of getting another job in law enforcement, but for now, he was happy to work as a security guard at the Summer Olympics, which were coming soon to his hometown.
The International Olympic Committee has awarded the 1996 Olympic Games to the city of Atlanta.
Atlanta is home to almost 5.9 million people, and it's the 9th most populated city in the U.S. And in 1990, the city was proud to be called upon to host the 96 Summer Games, after beating out an impressive list.
Okay, let me go to the New York Times report here.
We have had word now of an explosion.
A bombing at Atlanta's Summer Olympics.
Total chaos, mass
pandemonium going on down here
led to a massive law enforcement investigation.
We will consider it an act of terrorism.
And soon set off a frenzy of speculation.
Who is the real Richard Jewell?
FBI officials believe he fits a profile of the type of person who might commit such an act, but concede they have no hard evidence against him.
Will you categorically say that you did not do this?
I did not do it.
Richard Jewell's nightmare was a cautionary tale.
It's hard to believe that it is really over.
But what lessons have law enforcement and the press really learned?
It is now clear that the shooter was not Ryan Lanza, it was his brother, Adam Lanza.
An earlier report that I had was incorrect, that he was connected with the Tea Party. In fact, that's a different Jim Holmes.
Some media outlets were tweeting out that the shooter was a man named Raleigh Chance.
When I leave the house, I'm looking over my shoulder.
Welcome to Atlanta's Olympic Stadium for the opening ceremony of these Centennial Olympic Games.
In the early morning of July 27, 1996, more than 100 people were injured and one killed by a bomb blast at Atlanta's Centennial Olympic Park.
After the bombing had occurred, the victims were taken away. I remember very distinctly, as the light came up, I started meeting some of the people around in the area, and one of the people on the scene was Richard Jewell.
Jewell, a former sheriff's deputy, had discovered the bomb in a backpack and helped clear the area before the explosion. He was hailed a hero.
And I just hope that we catch the people that did it.
Following the bombing, there were a lot of suspects, but it wasn't too far into the investigation where Richard Jewell's name started surfacing.
The president of a college where Jewell had worked security called the FBI to say he had concerns about Jewell. A check into Jewell's background revealed other witnesses who reported he had a history of employment problems and was obsessed with law enforcement.
Our profilers from Quantico were watching the shows and saying, we've had instances in the recent past where police officers invented situations so that they could be the heroes. He started to have that look about him. We've got the Olympic Games going on. We're concerned that whoever did it may do it again if we don't get hold of them.
It was a lot of pressure to resolve the case very quickly.
The assumption was that everyone would keep everything confidential because of the importance of the investigation. In hindsight, that was naive because people like to talk.
An unidentified law enforcement source leaked Jewell's name to Ron Martz's reporting partner, Kathy Scruggs.
It was important for us as the hometown paper to try to verify as soon as possible and put that information out on the street.
Word quickly reached investigators.
It sped up the timetable in the investigation on what the investigators wanted to do to try to get to Richard Jewell before his name was all over creation. Law enforcement really wanted to talk with Richard Jewell, either to find out if he did it or to clear him.
We wanted to create an environment, if we brought him in for an interview, where he would be comfortable.
So when two agents went to talk to Jewell and he expressed concerns about being interviewed on videotape, they told him it would be used in a training film for first responders. He then agreed to come to Atlanta's FBI office.
I don't think they were very far into the interview when I received a phone call from the director. And the director said, I want you to stop the interview to warn him of his rights. Do it now. And so I instructed the assistant special agent in charge to knock on the door.
Alexander later saw on videotape what happened next.
The investigation was going along as if it was a training video for a first responder. At a point, the investigators just said, we want to make this as realistic as possible, or something to that effect. We're even going to read you the Miranda rights. And as they start, the camera's on Richard Jewell, and his eyes widen a little bit, and it's like there's a cartoon character light bulb going off on top, and you realize he's saying, wait a minute, am I a suspect?
FBI has a suspect. Read all about it.
The news had already hit the streets when from inside the FBI office, Jewell called a friend who was a lawyer.
I asked him if he'd read the newspaper. He said no, he hadn't, so I read him the headline. And I said, man, they think you did it. Asked him if he was under arrest, and they said no, he was not. And I said, great, then he's leaving.
I remember saying to my editor, this man's life will never be the same, simply because he suddenly was in the eye of this media storm.
I'm looking at some of the comments on Steve Saylor's blog regarding his review of this movie. Jewell. One comment. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution's defense of their journalist Kathy Scruggs was absurd. Included the following passage about her getting scoops from law enforcement. Whenever something would happen, the police would call Kathy. They always trusted her to get the scoop. She was proud the FBI called her about Richard Jewell. She was proud of the way she reported it to begin with. So Kathy Scruggs was essentially a PR person for the FBI. Atlanta Journal-Constitution also conceded that she was a hard, partying, pill-popping drunk who was once found naked in a taxi at 3 a.m. But supposedly she never would have slept with a source for a scoop. And it is just pure slander that Clint Eastwood would put that in his movie. They also don't understand why the average person thinks they are pushing an agenda and are not a fair and impartial source of factual information for the public. So, Kathy Scruggs, there's been a lot of media attention about Kathy Scruggs in the light of this movie, but you realize that she died of a drug overdose, perhaps an intentional drug overdose. Somehow, I didn't get that picture very clearly from all the media reports.
Summer Olympic bombings in Atlanta is now facing some heavy criticism and a possible lawsuit. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution says parts of the Richard Jewell film are defamatory. They accuse the Clint Eastwood directed film and Warner Brothers of showing AJC reporter Kathy Scruggs, played by Olivia Wilde, as trading sex in exchange for FBI tips. Now, the newspaper wants a public statement from the studio saying some events were imagined and a disclaimer at the end of the film as well. Trent Gilbert, digital contributor for Atlanta and Company, is in for Liza Lucas. And Trent, this is getting a ton of reaction. I've seen so many articles online preparing for this story, especially with this movie set to be released this week.
That's right, Francesca. Many of you are not pleased with that portrayal of Scruggs in the upcoming movie. And we're hearing from a lot of you on Twitter talking about that defamation, including HuffPost senior writer Jeff Young, who says, I can't emphasize enough how lame it is to traffic in such tired tropes.
Tired tropes, guys. Tired tropes.
It's the movie moment marking the turning point in the real-life drama of Richard Jewell.
The FBI is looking at Richard Jewell.
The security guard hero turned suspect in the deadly 1996 Olympic bombing in Atlanta.
I didn't do this.
But this morning, the movie's release sparking a new drama surrounding Kathy Scruggs, the Atlanta newspaper reporter who discovered the FBI labeled Jewell a suspect days after he was called a hero.
There's a scene in the movie where she trades sex for the story tip, which is not true. It never happened. I just thought, wow, they really did that to someone who's dead and can't even defend herself.
Editor Kevin Riley at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, where Scruggs worked, says the scene is appalling. The paper calling on director Clint Eastwood to issue a statement and include a prominent disclaimer instead of the one after the end credits.
Kathy Scruggs was a very interesting personality, so how she did it, nobody probably will ever really know, but it could have certainly happened this way.
Warner Brothers calls the claims baseless, writing, it is unfortunate and the ultimate irony that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, having been a part of the rush to judgment of Richard Jewell, is now trying to malign our filmmakers and cast.
I report the facts.
You've ruined this man's life. Online, actress Olivia Wilde's writing, she couldn't speak for creative decisions, adding, I do not believe that Kathy traded sex for tips, and it was never my intention to suggest she had.
Man's name is Richard Jewell. He's a hero.
Now, as the movie captures the real-life chaos surrounding its title character,
happened to be at the right place at the right time.
Others taking on Hollywood in a fight to get this story straight.
Now, 3 months after the bombing, the FBI finally cleared Jewell's name, and he then in turn sued multiple news agencies, including NBC. Nearly all of those cases were settled out of court, with the exception of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, whose suit was later dismissed.
Okay, so Kathy Scruggs, what do we know about her? How did she die? So she was the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper first reporter who first broke the story Through a source that the FBI was investigating hero security guard Richard Jewell, the Atlanta Olympics bombing. Sparked a media frenzy around Jewell that lasted for weeks before he was exonerated. What was Kathy Scruggs' cause of death? In the end, the feisty police reporter was a broken person. Scruggs died of a drug overdose, acute morphine toxicity. Contrary to some news reports, the coroner could not determine whether it was an accidental one or suicide. You don't see this in the news reports about this heroic journalist. She had a lethal level of morphine. Also, she was on all sorts of other drugs and a ton of alcohol, paroxetine, mirtazapine. All of the alcohol may have been produced by the post-mortem decomposition process. She also had severe coronary artery arteriosclerosis, blockage of blood vessels that supply blood to the heart. And it's clear that Kathy Scruggs was emotionally damaged from the controversies over her journalism. Richard Jewell was not the bomber. That was Eric Rudolph, an anti-government extremist who led police on a massive manhunt. She was never at peace or at rest with this story. It haunted her until her last breath. Former co-worker Tony Kiss said to her old newspaper a story about her. It crushed her like a June bug on the sidewalk. Another friend said her soul was gone. She was so empty. Atlanta magazine, right? Scruggs appeared to have died peacefully in her sleep. That's what all the news reports say. It's a lie. Why are they promoting this lie? She died of a drug overdose. But the media have all lined up to say that she died peacefully in her sleep. Friends who talked to her old newspaper in an attempt to resuscitate her reputation in the wake of the Clint Eastwood movies say that she never got over the media infamy when it turned out that Richard Jewell was innocent. Her reporting and that of the national news media was criticized as a rush to judgment. She was on medication for a variety of things. Her heart just gave way, said her brother. It was just hard living. Her choice of boyfriends was not great. She spent all the money she had and more on going to the depths of depression. The word filter was not in her body. I loved Kathy, but she was crazy. She was found dead at her residence in a state of decomposition. She did not pass away peacefully in her sleep, as the media wanted to believe. Scruggs was wearing a gray short-sleeve t-shirt with the green inscription Atlanta Motor Speedway and a pair of panties when she was found dead. Rigor mortis was present. Stress of the libel lawsuit took a terrible toll on Scruggs over the years. She was arrested twice in Buckhead on charges involving intoxication. A friend claimed she was slipped a date rape drug in one of the incidents. Her health declined horribly. She was hospitalized, unable to move her legs. She had intestinal surgery. She was under stress from financial problems as her medical bills mounted. She felt treated as a pariah in the newsroom and complained that she no longer had a desk. A hard-drinking, tough-talking police reporter, a colorful personality. Five fast facts to know about Kathy Scruggs here from heavy.com. She was described as a delightful throwback who exploded into a room. Hobbs still talking in amazement about her bravado. She once beat the police to a murder scene and brazenly crawled in through a back window. Where have you been? She demanded to police. She was blonde and wore miniskirts and gaudy stockings. She smoked, she drank, she cursed, she flaunted her sexuality. She dated Louis Grizzard. She dated an editor who beat her with a telephone. She dated cops, including one who was accused of stealing money from the pockets of the dead. Depending on how much she wanted a story, she wore skirts that much shorter. Grew up in a prominent family. Died young of an overdose. And she got her story through an FBI source. 1997 article describes in detail how that story happened. She was called a police groupie. There's debate in the newsroom over whether to hold the story that the FBI was investigating Richard Jewell. One controversial line reported by AGC, Richard Jewell fits the profile of the lone bomber.
Of other cities, including Athens, Toronto, and Melbourne. Kent Alexander, who co-wrote The Suspect with Kevin Salwin, was the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia and is a lifelong resident of Atlanta. He said winning the games meant everything to the city.
In 1990, when we won the Olympics, there was not any real history of Atlanta winning much of anything. We'd never won an NFL title, NBA, World Series, nothing. And so most of us just assumed this would be another disappointment. In fact, by that point, we'd been branded Loserville, USA by a number of publications. So it was just huge. When we got the news that Atlanta won the Olympics, the city just exploded with excitement.
Over the next 6 years, preparations for the games included an unprecedented security plan. A New York Times article in 1996 called it the largest peacetime security operation for a public event in American history. There were 30,000 security guards, including 14,000 soldiers, patrolling the events at a cost of over $300 million. The underlying fear was that the games would be an easy target for either foreign or domestic terrorists. The planning covered the possibility of bombs, kidnappings, and even a poison gas attack, like the one on the Tokyo subway system that occurred the year before, which had killed 12 people and injured thousands.
Okay, looking at this 1997 Vanity Fair article on the ballad of Richard Jewell, Kathy Scruggs had good contacts with Atlanta police. She was a police groupie. The newsroom atmosphere at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution resembled that at FBI headquarters. There was a frenzy to be first. Kent Walker, a newsroom intern, published a story in the same edition with a glaring mistake in the headline, "Bomb Suspect had sought limelight press interviews." On the surface, the story had an irresistible newsroom logic. Jewell was clearly looking for recognition. And the paper said Richard Jewell had approached newspapers, including the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, seeking publicity for his actions, but he had not. Had not. They just made it up.
Also in the back of everyone's mind were two recent terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. The World Trade Center truck bomb in 1993 and the Oklahoma City bombing carried out by homegrown terrorist Timothy McVeigh. And to add to that, just 2 days before the games were set to open, TWA Flight 800 had mysteriously exploded off the coast of Long Island, killing all 230 people on board. Tensions were high, but officials felt prepared for whatever might come their way. 8 days into the games, things were going well. All that planning seemed to be paying off. About 12,000 people had gathered at the main stage in Centennial Park for a free concert by Mac Jack and the Heart Attack. The atmosphere was electric. People partied and danced as the band played on. Just before 1 a.m., Richard Jewell spotted a green backpack under a bench. A few minutes earlier, a group of intoxicated young men had been standing around the bench drinking beer. Jewell assumed one of them must have left the bag behind. He called over a nearby...
Okay, let's get back to the New York Times report here.
Are they letting you go to work? They're letting you go to work. You're free to go. Did they tell you now not to leave town?
No.
Can you categorically say that you did not do this?
I did not do it.
Categorically.
Yes.
Television cameras surrounded Jewell's apartment as federal agents searched for evidence.
It created a circus environment. I'm sure anger with his attorney. but we had a responsibility to try to figure out whether he was involved.
Some of the coverage, while acknowledging that Jewell was only under investigation, still cast him in the worst possible light.
The hero may be a possible villain.
You get a different picture of Richard Jewell in these North Georgia mountains. He lived alone in this rented home with his Doberman dogs, most days with the blinds drawn.
But behind the scenes, a few investigators had doubts.
I had one of my agents, and I believe an FBI agent, redo and watch the interviews in detail. And my agent came to me, and the first thing he said was, "This guy didn't do it."
His attorney, whether I agree with it or not, did not want to cooperate at all with us. It hurt our ability to resolve Richard Jewell in a timely manner. It made him a victim. It didn't make us look very good either.
Still tailed by FBI agents and unable to get a job, his only source of income is now a telephone hotline.
2 months after Jewell...
Gee, I wonder why his attorney did not want to cooperate with the FBI, which was intent on shafting him.
...was identified, he was offered a deal. If he answered investigators' questions, he could be cleared.
Once Richard Jewell did come in, it became very apparent over the next few weeks that
these guys are scum. Absolute scum, ruining this guy's life with absolutely zero evidence. Zero, zip, zilch, zero, no evidence that he did this. They just thought in their brilliance that this guy must have done it because he was a white man who was chubby and from the South and lived with his mother, and so they could just profile him that way and just completely shaft him. That no evidence, none whatsoever, that Richard Jewell committed this crime, but they just screwed him over. So remember that when you're dealing with law enforcement. Remember that when you're dealing with news media. Don't automatically accord people who wear uniforms respect. Be very careful and make your judgments on an individual basis. Just because someone's in the FBI or in the police or with the CIA or works for the government or is a journalist does not mean that there automatically should be accorded deference or respect. These guys are such scum.
Yeah. There's no reason to charge him.
Hey, all done. Richard Jewell finally got what he's been waiting for. A hand-delivered letter from the Justice Department says, based on the evidence developed to date, Jewell is not considered a target of the federal investigation.
After he was cleared of suspicion, several FBI agents were reprimanded, including the agent who read Jewell his Miranda rights during the ruse. Jewell pursued legal action against several news organizations, citing, among other things, a column that implied a comparison between Jewell and a convicted murderer, and another that called him a fat, failed former sheriff's deputy.
Here's Richard Jewell, the 114th victim of the Atlanta Olympic bomb.
This is the first time I have ever asked you to turn your cameras on me. For 88 days, I lived a nightmare. For 88 days, my mother lived a nightmare too. And it's rushed for the headline that the hero was the bomber. The media cared nothing for my feelings as a human being.
NBC, CNN, and the New York Post were among those which settled for undisclosed sums. But the Atlanta Journal-Constitution fought the case for 15 years and
remember, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution led the way to ruin this man's life with absolutely zero evidence he was responsible for the bombing. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution led the way because he was a fat white guy who lived with his mom. Therefore, they felt perfectly entitled to ruin this guy's life. They're absolutely shameless. They still contend that they're the ones who are the true victims. They're the ones who have been libeled by Clint Eastwood's movie. They're still contending that. They're still arguing that today. And virtually the entire media complex is lined up behind these lying scumbags.
And won.
There's no way that anybody can convince me that we libeled Richard Jewell. The information we printed was that he was the focus of the investigation. He was the focus of the investigation. Am I sorry for what happened to Richard Jewell? Yes, I'm sorry for what happened to Richard Jewell, but I don't feel responsible for what happened to him.
This is video that just came into us.
I followed the Boston Marathon case very closely, and I was really struck by how far Law enforcement has come, and particularly their use of technology has come.
After a very detailed analysis of photo, video, and other evidence, we are releasing photos of these two suspects. The public will play a critical role in identifying and locating these individuals.
In the Boston case, you wanted to bring the media in at almost every point so that you get out these leads.
Millions across the world saw these photos instantly, tweeted and retweeted, Facebooked and Facebook shared.
But social media also made it easier for the public and the press to quickly spread misinformation and false leads, whether they originated with law enforcement or not.
Crowdsourced investigations turned into a witch hunt. This missing student was wrongfully accused of being a suspect.
In the last 2 years, innocent men have been wrongly associated with a number of high-profile crimes, including mass shootings in Newtown, Connecticut, and the Washington Navy Yard. After the Boston bombing, the New York Post, while not naming these two men as suspects, ran a photo of them at the marathon under the headline, "Bag Men."
Being wrongly accused of an act of terrorism is its own kind of nightmare. Ask Richard Jewell, who went through the media pile-on.
The obvious lesson learned from Richard Jewell is avoid identifying people as a suspect if there's not really good reason to do so, because it can lead to just what happened in Richard Jewell's case, the identification of someone who not only was innocent, but was a hero.
As it turned out, the true perpetrator of the Olympic bombing remained active. He would go on to bomb 2 abortion clinics and a gay nightclub in the years following Centennial Olympic Park.
The crime scene in Atlanta was a complicated one, to say the least, but we ended up getting a picture of a silhouetted figure on the bench where the bomb was placed. We had the bomber. The problem was the quality was so poor that you could make out no facial features. I can't help but think that if we fast forwarded to today, that we would have had Eric Rudolph's face on there and would have solved that crime quite quickly.
Nearly a decade after the Olympic bombing, Rudolph pled guilty in an Atlanta courthouse. Richard Jewell was there.
He gave me a hug, and I noticed some of my former law enforcement colleagues stepping away because there was still something about it. I think there was a feeling that they didn't want to be associated with Richard Jewell.
Jewell eventually found work as a sheriff's deputy in Georgia. He died in 2007 due to complications brought on by diabetes. He was 44 years old.
People to this day think that he was arrested. He was never arrested. He had nothing to do with it. Is that the implication that you should get from responsible reporting?
Exactly. Looking at some of the comments now on Steve Saylor's blog. This guy writes, I had finished grad school, was living in Montgomery County, Maryland in 2002 when the Beltway sniper was picking up people at gas stations and store parking lots. Like everyone else in the area, followed the case closely. The October 14 shooting in Manassas, Virginia, even drove to the area right after the news to watch the dragnet. Saw how piss poor it was. One corner there were dozens of guys in FBI, DEA, ATF, flak jackets quickly scanning cars with flashlights. It was clear they were looking for a particular description. White male. I devoured all the news, watched CNN, Fox, MSNBC nonstop. I clearly recall every single criminal profiler, including former FBI profilers Clint Van Zandt and Robert Ressler, as well as Pat Brown, say with an air of metaphysical certitude that it was a white male. Pat Brown went further, said it was probably a white nationalist type. Turned out it was a couple of gay black Muslims. Morris Camp writes, the bombing and framing of Richard Jewell came out of the interplay of social forces resident in Atlanta and the FBI's dealings with the city. Included institutional guilt for bugging the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and successfully using criminal profiling techniques to find Wayne Williams, the Atlanta child murderer. Like many other American cities, Atlanta had a less traumatic experience with the civil rights rioting in the late 1960s. The city's political elite came to believe that Atlanta's economic performance caused the civil rights riots to simply pass them over, and they developed the moniker that Atlanta was the city too busy to hate. However, having a moniker with hate in it means there's plenty of hate to go around. Atlanta, the rest of Georgia, is not socially stable along racial lines. The moniker also implies that one must be ever busy to avoid being overwhelmed by hate. Mayor Andrew Young made a bid for Atlanta to host the Olympic Games in 1990. Young claimed that he lived within 50 yards of the local Nazi Party headquarters as a child and was thus motivated for anti-racist reasons to host the games. This new book on Richard Jewell highlights the unseen logic of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Christopher Caldwell has called it a second constitution, meaning that just as the U.S. Constitution allows for 30-round magazines, although the founders only knew of flintlock rifles, the things implied by the Civil Rights Act but not explicitly specified have a legal force all of their own. In the case of Richard Jewell, the implications of the Civil Rights Act fall into two categories. The first is the criminalization of voluntary civic virtue in things like security or neighborhood watches. When working class people are free to act to defend their community, the problems of crime are easily controllable. Civil rights is a system that cannot tolerate this. Ordinary citizens suppressing crime means ordinary whites can suppress blacks and other non-whites, and this must not be allowed. Second implication of the Civil Rights Act is that all whites, especially working class white men, must be the threat. In the early 1960s, the FBI became the enforcement arm of the civil rights movement as well as the corresponding Civil Rights Act. The entire institution was arranged to see Southern white working class men as the enemy. Civil rights and affirmative action policies helped the real bomber carry out his attack. He called in a warning to Atlanta's 911 from a payphone, so a disproportionate number of 911 operators, let's just say they are not the smartest. Atlanta's 911 center, no exception, not staffed with the sharpest folks. You can see from the transcript that this kind of dysfunction was a factor in the attack's success. Dispatcher Zone 5, 911 operator, you know the address to Centennial Park. Go, don't ask me to lie to you. I tried to call ACC, ain't nobody answering the phone, but I just got this man or talking about there's a bomb set to go off in 30 minutes in Centennial Park. Oh, Lord, child. Oh, okay. Wait a minute. Centennial Park, you put it in and it won't go in? No, unless I'm spelling Centennial wrong. How are we spelling Centennial? C-E-N-T-E-N-N-I. How do you spell Centennial? I'm spelling it right. The computer ain't taking. Well, they did their best. It's clear that these 911 dispatchers lost critical time because they can't spell. Not very intelligent. Like, why would we want intelligent people working as 911 dispatchers? They couldn't find the address to the Centennial Park. A 911 dispatcher had the thought to get multiple phone numbers to the Olympics security headquarters or to the security tower at Centennial Park. But why would we want competent 911 operators? Why would we want competent air traffic controllers? Let's just use affirmative action to help people who are not competent do jobs, and so what if a lot of innocent people die in the process?
A police officer, Tom Davis, and told him what was going on. Together, they began searching for the young men. When they found them, the men said, "Not our bag." Jewell was immediately worried, but according to Alexander and Salwin's book, The Suspect, Officer Davis wasn't that concerned. Over 100 suspicious bags had been reported in the first 8 days of the games, and they all turned out to be just lost or forgotten by their owners. But the officer followed protocol and radioed the command center about the situation. While they waited, Jewell and the police officer cleared a 15-foot perimeter around the backpack. Within a few minutes, an FBI bomb tech was on the scene. Down on his hands and knees, he crawled under the bench with a flashlight in hand to look at the backpack. When he carefully unzipped it, what he saw stopped him dead in his tracks. Wiring, pipes, end caps, and a timing device. The tech carefully crawled away, and the bomb management center was called. One problem: they were 20 minutes away.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the coronavirus. No non-Chinese deaths from the coronavirus, but the Washington Post wants you to rat out your neighbors anyway, Lance Walton writes. So I had previously reported the case of Dr. Noah Kahl, a young Cambridge University political scientist whom the once august university fired for publishing peer-reviewed research on the subject of race and for collaborating with like-minded academics. You guys realize that no non-Chinese have died from the coronavirus? One paper of Kahl's particularly upset the woke classes because it turned one of their many fallacious arguments against the biological concept of race on its head, argued in effect that the truth about race will actually set us free. This is directly relevant to the current panic over the coronavirus, where we see the negative consequences of race denialism playing out all too clearly. 2018, Carl published an article in the journal Evolutionary Psychological Science entitled How Stifling Debate Around Race, Genes, and IQ Can Do Harm. Whereas leftists insist that we shouldn't discuss race because of the harm this might do in terms of encouraging racism and giving fuel to racist groups and challenging equality, Carl countered that not discussing it can potentially have worse consequences than acknowledging race. First, if you believe in the blank slate view, then may make Soviet-like attempts to improve humanity, which only makes things worse because human nature is strongly genetic. Second, if we are all genetically equal in our intellectual capacities, then the only way that a group such as Ashkenazi Jews have been so successful would be through immoral behavior, thus providing people with an incentive to persecute them. Third, if you don't acknowledge race and do not research medical conditions suffered disproportionately by specific races, and you do not take race differences, medical responsiveness, or alcohol or disease resistance into account, this leads to needless deaths. Fourth, if you suppress the discussion of race, you might find, for example, the fear of being accused of racism caused officials in Rotherham, Northern England, to turn a blind eye and even cover up for Muslim rape gangs. And parents in Oxfordshire, where there are also Pakistani grooming and rape gangs, underage white girls asked why no arrests had been made. The police actually said, frankly, they were under pressure not to arrest Pakistanis in case it looked racist. Now, what if there were a deadly virus spreading around the world that had started with a particular race? Inevitably, rational people would do everything they could possibly do to avoid that race. You wouldn't socialize with people of that race. You wouldn't shake hands with people from that race. Indeed, you cross the road to avoid them. That's what's happening, we are told, with regard to Chinese people and other East Asians, due to the fact that the coronavirus started in Japan. Ruling class's response, this rational response reaction must be wiped out. Washington Post recently posted an extraordinary Stalinist invitation for readers to inform on their neighbors. Have you seen or experienced any discrimination, racism, or xenophobia connected to the ongoing coronavirus epidemic? Share your story. So far, only Chinese people have died of this virus. It may well be that other races are more resistant to it. This week, a handful of Germans working in a car factory have contracted the coronavirus from a Chinese colleague. Of course, they too could be ethnically Chinese. The media won't say. The journal PLOS Pathogens reports that viruses that jump the species barrier, such as corona, become less and less virulent as they spread away from the place where the jump was made. You can only find 2 proven cases of whites catching the coronavirus as of Saturday, February 8. One was a British man on a ship quarantined off Japan. The situation does not appear to be serious. The other is also British, Connor Reed, quoted in Wuhan, disease's epicenter, where it's presumably the most dangerous. He refused antibiotics, treated himself with hot whiskey and honey, and he survived. Why is our ruling class suppressing the truth? Their desire to punish white people is certainly one reason. A deeper motive of fanatical determination to maintain the myth that race is a social construct. British Indian journalist Angela Saini claimed in a widely touted 2019 book, Superior: The Return of Race Science, race is not a biological reality because supposedly superficial traits such as skin color and morphology. Thus, in the Saini world, it is impossible for there to be racial differences in disease prevalence because that might imply that race was a biological reality, and that might imply that all races are not equal, but we are all equal, and if you don't agree, then you're a bad person like President Trump. In Saini's world, whites can die of the coronavirus, which means they will avoid Chinese people. And that's racist, and that's discrimination, and please report on your neighbors. It's very much like AIDS. So AIDS, the West anyway, is overwhelmingly a disease contracted by homosexuals who have unprotected anal sex with each other. It's also contracted by people who are intravenous drug dealers. So if you don't have unprotected anal sex with other men, and if you don't share needles, then you're very unlikely to get AIDS. But the media pushed us in the 80s and the 90s that AIDS does not discriminate. Well, in fact, AIDS does very strongly discriminate, as does apparently the coronavirus.
It was now 1:08 a.m. As concert-goers danced, about a dozen officers formed a human shield and pushed people back. They were trying to expand the perimeter around the bench and the backpack. Richard Jewell joined them after running into the tower to warn everyone about the threat. Officers were having a hard time clearing the area. According to Alexander and Salwin's book, a lot of people had been drinking, and they were too busy watching the concert to heed the warning by police. Then at 1:20 a.m., as law enforcement contemplated a full evacuation, the homemade pipe bomb, spiked with nails and screws, exploded. The explosion was deafening. The ground and nearby buildings shook. The flash was fiery orange. Smoke billowed into the sky, and the smell of gunpowder was everywhere. Nails and screws rained down on the crowd. The metal bits sliced through clothing and flesh of scores of spectators. When the dust settled from the bomb, bodies were scattered everywhere. Screaming and moaning filled the air. 111 people had been injured, including 24 police officers. And 44-year-old Alice Hawthorne was dead, her body riddled with shrapnel. Hawthorne had been at the park with her 14-year-old daughter, who was among those injured in the blast. A 40-year-old Turkish cameraman also died that night. He suffered a heart attack while running to cover the explosion. As the sun rose in Atlanta, Olympic officials announced to the world the Games would go on, just as they did in 1972 when Palestinian terrorists killed 11 Israelis at the Munich Games. U.S. President Clinton offered words of encouragement to a nation shaken by what had happened.
We will take every necessary step to protect the athletes and those who are attending the Games. But we must not let these attacks stop us from going forward. We cannot let terror win. That is not the American way. The Olympics will continue. The Games will go on. The Olympic spirit will prevail. We must be firm in this. We cannot be intimidated by acts of terror.
Olympic flags flew at half-staff at each game site as jittery athletes and subdued fans observed a moment of silence. Centennial Park was closed as police investigated the crime scene, but all other events went ahead as scheduled. Surprisingly, attendance was only slightly affected. 90% of ticket holders showed up to take in sports like track and field, diving, beach volleyball, and baseball. Meanwhile, it was all hands on deck for the FBI and other law enforcement agencies.
Okay, looking at some comments to Steve Saylor's blog. With regard to military personnel and law enforcement as a culture, we need to get past this reflexive respect for everyone wearing a uniform. People in the military, people in law enforcement are just people. Some deserve respect, some don't. The guy profilers also got the Unabomber very wrong too. The idea of psychological profiling was popularized by film and TV. In response, universities began providing courses in forensic psychology. That law enforcement agencies do not recognize this discipline or its qualifications is irrelevant, as is general failure psychological profiling. So,
agencies as they gathered evidence and investigated numerous leads. They called in the agency's behavioral science unit, like the guys on Mindhunter, and had them start working up a profile for the possible bomber. Here's former U.S. Attorney Kent Alexander.
The pressure on law enforcement was huge. There were 2 million visitors in Atlanta, 15,000 journalists in Atlanta, 10,000 athletes. It was the biggest event in the world. So you can't get more pressure than that, because it's not that anyone had to say, oh, this is important, you should look at it. It's the fact that everyone knew there was a bomber on the loose. In that kind of crowd in Atlanta during the Olympics in 1996, the bomber could strike again.
Okay, here's a perspective that never would have occurred to me, but we've got Regent Law Professor James Duane gives viewers startling reasons why they should not talk to police. Maybe.
I was invited to give you a taste of a typical law school classroom experience here today, and I thought I would take advantage of this opportunity to do something that's been on my mind for a while. To stand up and to proudly say, God bless America, God bless the Bill of Rights, and thank God for the Fifth Amendment. I'm not ashamed to say I'm proud of the Fifth Amendment, and I'm proud to admit on camera and on the internet that I will never talk to any police officer under any circumstances, with all due respect, sir. I'm doing something really extraordinary here today, something you'll almost never see another law professor do as long as you live. I'm really putting myself on the spot here. This was my idea. By my invitation, I have given up half of my time, approximately. I'm giving equal time and the last word to an expert who really knows something about what I'll be talking about. So I'm opening myself up to the possibility that he will contradict me. I was a criminal defense attorney when I was in private practice. So I want to make sure, in fairness to you, if I'm misleading you or giving you a slanted or one-sided presentation, you'll be able to get the last word from somebody else. I'm sure he'll have a lot to teach all of us, including myself. The Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution provides, no person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. And this unfortunate amendment has gotten a bad rap in recent times, much of it tragically and unnecessarily through, as you may have heard, the headlines. Let me read you something that was taken out of the newspaper this morning, and I want you to listen to it closely. I'm giving you a heads up. I'm warning you in advance, which is not fair to you. Not fair to me, but I'm giving you a warning that I'll be quizzing you on this in just a few minutes. This will test your aptitude for legal study and legal practice. Listen closely. It won't take long. Last night, agents of the Norfolk Police Department found 3 victims of an apparent murder dead in an apartment in the East Ocean View area. The apparent victims of a gangland-style slaying, and possibly the victims of gang-related violence. The police are investigating this as a possible murder and suicide, but right now suspect that the 3 were all killed by the same individual. No suspects have yet been identified in the slaying, but veteran police detective George Brook has confirmed that police are following up on evidence pointing to the possible involvement of an off-duty naval officer as the perpetrator. The bodies, which were found by the apartment manager at about 8 o'clock in the morning, appear to have been slain sometime earlier in the same evening, probably sometime between midnight and 2 o'clock in the morning. Those are all the facts I'll ask you to remember, and it won't be for very long either. Let's see how well you do. I'll be quizzing you in just a few minutes. Now, here's the easiest question you'll ever get from a client in all the days of your life. Question, hey, the police are here. They want to talk to me. What should I do? Well, I could give you my answer to that question in case you haven't already guessed it, but why don't we go to a real expert, Justice Robert Jackson. A prosecutor's prosecutor. Like me, he began his private practice in Buffalo, New York, years before I did. And after that, he served as general counsel for the Bureau of Internal Revenue, the U.S. Department of Treasury, the Security and Exchange Commission, assistant U.S. Attorney General for the Tax Division, later the Solicitor General and the Attorney General of the United States, and then the chief U.S. prosecutor for the Nuremberg trials. That's an impressive resume. Years later, when he was a justice on the Supreme Court, Justice Jackson stated, quote, any lawyer worth his salt, today we would say his or her, will tell the suspect, his client, in no uncertain terms to make no statement to the police under any circumstances. There's the title of my talk. I'm here to explain to you the surprising and somewhat counterintuitive and admittedly unlikely reasons why Justice Jackson was right. I'm reminded of this because I'm amazed. We're all amazed by the frequency with which we see newspaper articles coming on all the time from people who really ought to know better, who say, well, I'll talk to the police. I mean, after all, I'm a senator. I'm O.J. Simpson. I'm an experienced, highly polished individual. I've got a lot of experience with public relations, even criminal defense attorneys. There was a local news story here in the Virginia Pilot just a couple of months ago about an experienced criminal defense lawyer who ended up getting convicted of criminal assault because he talked to the police. He was accused of having assaulted another attorney in the hallway. There were no other witnesses to this. A woman said that he grabbed her by the throat during an argument over a case. He denied it. At trial, it was his word against hers. He said, I did not even touch her. But unfortunately for him, when the police had approached him earlier and said, would you be willing to answer some questions? He said, sure, why not? I'm an attorney. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I'm savvy. I'm sophisticated. I've got oratorical prowess. I'm accustomed to dealing with the police, by all means. And then there was a conversation that was not recorded. When the case went to trial, it was no longer his word against hers, because when he testified at trial, I never touched her. The officer took her to the stand and testified, well, when I met with him, he said he did put his hand on her throat, but just as a joke. Then he had to take the stand again and say, that's not true. I never said that. I never admitted to you that now it's his word against 2 people. Who's telling the truth? We'll never know for sure. But he was found guilty. Now, here's part of the problem. The heart of the problem, as Justice Breyer on the U.S. Supreme Court explained in 1998, is, quote, the complexity of modern federal criminal law codified in several thousand sections of the United States Code and the virtually infinite variety of factual circumstances that might trigger an investigation into a possible violation of the law make it difficult for anyone to know in advance just when a particular set of statements might later appear to a prosecutor to be relevant to some investigation. One expert on criminal law recently noted that estimates of the current size of the body of federal criminal law vary, although it has been reported that the Congressional Research Service can no longer even count the current number of federal crimes. That's right, even the federal government has lost count. These laws are scattered over all 50 pages of the U.S. Code, encompassing roughly 27,000 pages. Worse yet, these statutes often incorporate by reference to the provisions of administrative regulations. Estimates of how many such regulations exist are even less well settled, although the ABA thinks there may be nearly 10,000. Here's one of those 10,000 federal criminal statutes on the book that you probably never heard about. It's called the Lacey Act. 16 U.S.C. Section 3370 says it's a federal offense for any person to import, export, transport, sell, receive, acquire, or purchase any fish or wildlife or plant taken, possessed, transported, or sold in the violation of any law, treaty, or regulation of the United States or any Indian tribal law or any state or any foreign law. People have been convicted in federal court for violating this statute because they brought back a bony fish from Honduras, not knowing that Honduran law, not American, but Honduran law, forbade the possession of the bony fish. People have been convicted under this law because they were found in possession of what's called a short lobster, a lobster that's under a certain size. Some states forbid you from possessing a lobster if he's under a certain length. It doesn't matter if he's dead or alive. It doesn't matter if you killed it or if he died of natural causes. It doesn't even matter if you acted in self-defense. Did you know that? Did you know it could be a federal offense to be in possession of a lobster? Admit it. Raise your hand if you did not know that. There's the problem. And that's only one of 10,000 different ways. You know, the government gets pretty upset when people like me instructs the client, people like me and Justice Jackson. Don't talk to the police, don't answer any questions. But, you know, they can't have it both ways. You people.
Okay, Norvin Hobbs, long time since I've spoken to you, my friend. How's it going?
It's going pretty well, yeah. I think it's probably been about a year or so.
Yeah, so first of all, how is your health?
My health is same as it was last. No changes. Last time I went to the doctor, the only thing they noted was they think my spleen is enlarged somewhat from something to do with my liver, but it's not severe enough to be any cause for concern.
And what is your expected life expectancy?
Oh, hold on. Let me fix my audio.
Your audio's fine. See if you can just turn on.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, your audio's fine. Just see if you can turn on your camera. It should be.
Sorry about that. Whenever I plug my mic in, for some reason the audio temporarily disconnects.
No, I can hear your audio fine. Are you able to turn on your camera, or is that?
See if I yeah.
Here, I'm going to play the speech.
You've got 10,000 different ways of convicting us. Good for you, but you know, with the bitter comes to the sweet, with the good comes to the bad. That's 10,000 different ways my client might unknowingly implicate himself in some sort of a criminal transaction. One of the reasons.
Okay, Norvin, what's your life expectancy?
There is no exact certain date on that. I mean, probably 50s is realistic.
Okay. And so what are some of the highlights? It's been now we've got much more repressive YouTube rules than when we used to speak, so please be respectful of them, use euphemisms. You know how the game is played. Tell me about some of the highlights of your past year.
It's been an all right year, continuing to live stream, doing videos on BitChute. BitChute is actually a really growing platform. I'm very happy to see that. Of course, the alt-right people moved over there, but then a lot of the alt-light or whatever we're calling them now have moved over there, people like Sticks. So that has really grown. If they ever go ahead and do the live streaming option, I actually think it could overtake YouTube eventually. YouTube, it's not only failing in terms of political content, it's failing even just as for creator content. I have friends that do the gaming stuff on here. I watch some of the movie review stuff, and I'm always hearing those creators complain now that the copyright rules are so vague, they get struck, they get demonetized for like showing scenes from horror movies. So it's kind of becoming just another Netflix. It's all going to be corporate content, and other platforms are going to swoop up all the creators. I know all the gamers are like going to DLive.
Yeah, have you had any experiences with sites other than BitChute that you'd like to comment on?
Yeah. I have tried. Minds is all right for uploading video. I am going to be trying DLive here soon. I've used DLive to listen to things, but I'm going to be setting up and trying to stream on DLive hopefully in the next month or two. StreamYard is not a site to which you can stream from, but it allows you to stream to other sites. It's a good platform, really simple for people that don't want to do the whole, more complicated setting up the stream key and stuff.
And so what would be some of the highlights for your 2019?
2019 was it was an interesting year. I mean, some things happened that I guess were interesting, but at the same time, it felt like a lot of just the same old, same old. We saw more of Trump just getting stuck in this rut of nothing happening. They managed to drag out this stupid impeachment thing. Honestly, it just feels like 2017 to 2019 were really just the same year.
Right, but your 2019, what were some of the highlights for your year? Forget about Trump.
Oh, for me, it's pretty much been the same. Just, hanging around, paying attention to the news, paying attention to what's going on out in the world. This coronavirus thing is interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just reading that it's only Chinese people who've died from it, so maybe there is some reality to racial categories, though YouTube forbids stating that, so I disavow that thinking. But what are your thoughts on the coronavirus?
Well, yeah, I mean, this was a study, an academic study that was basically saying the coronavirus, some of the immune markers that apparently it attaches to attack are like 5 times more common in Asians than they are in Caucasians or Africans, and they're slightly more common in Asian men than Asian women. So it's an interesting phenomenon, and one could speculate on many things going on there.
Yeah. And have you seen the movie Richard Jewell?
No, I have not.
Have you seen any good movies in 2019?
2019, probably the best movie I went and saw was Brightburn, which was an interesting kind of horror spin on Superman. It was basically the Superman origin story, but the kid is evil. So it's basically an evil alien kid raised on a farm out in Kansas and then goes bad and kills people. It was interesting. It was a very dark kind of spin, and I actually liked that. When I was younger, I was into the comic book thing, but as I got older and became aware of certain things, I saw the subversive themes kind of in the superhero genre. So it was kind of cool to see, a big budget movie that kind of looks at this genre and subverted it a little and made it kind of dark, because there is a lot of weird stuff in that genre, especially with Superman. There's a lot of mythic references in the Superman story.
Have you seen Joker?
I did see Joker. It was all right. Being someone who used to be into comic books, it annoyed me because the character was nothing like the Joker. It's just like they took comic book movies are popular right now, so they wanted to do a big, Oscar bait dramatic movie, but they also wanted to, reach up some of the comic book movie dollars. So they just took the name Joker and slapped it on what is basically just a rehash of Taxi Driver. As a film, I mean, I thought it was all right. It was well acted. It was well shot. It was very dark, very unpleasant, gritty, unnerving. I'm not into those really gritty, harsh looks at things. The portrayal of mental illness was fairly accurate. I live in a city where you have a lot of homeless, mentally ill people. I mean, of course, obviously, it was somewhat exaggerated, but I mean, you do get people that go that crazy.
And the chat says, Luke, an American has died from this virus, when I pointed out that it seems as though it's only Chinese people who've died from the virus. But of course, an American may indeed be Chinese. So American may be his citizenship, but his nationality is still Chinese. So I am a convert to Judaism, but my genetics are overwhelmingly Anglo-Saxon and 1/16 Chinese. So there's a very big difference between your citizenship and your nationality. So it's still till I see evidence otherwise, it appears from what I am seeing that everybody who's died from the coronavirus is Chinese. Do you have any interest in the Richard Jewell movie?
No, I don't even think I've heard of it till now, but I've checked out a mainstream a long time ago. I don't even really pay attention. Some things pop up on my radar if it's something that the political circles I run in are talking about. But otherwise, no, I had not even heard of this.
What, do you know who this historical character was?
Richard Jewell, vaguely familiar. That wasn't the OJ lawyer. No, that wasn't. No, I don't know.
Richard Jewell was a security guard who discovered a bomb at the 1996 Atlanta Olympics and saved a lot of people's lives by pushing law enforcement to investigate it. And then he moved people away from the bomb. So when it went off, it only ended up killing 2 people, injured about 100. But then the FBI, without any evidence whatsoever, decided that he was the prime suspect, that the hero was really the actual bomber, and they leaked his name to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and ruined his life with no evidence whatsoever. And so various news organizations had to end up pay Richard Jewell $2 million, but of course his life was absolutely ruined. And he was the suspect because he was this overweight Southern male who happened to live with his mom, who was a Georgian who liked to go hunting. And the FBI, in their infinite wisdom, with all their infinite psychological profiling wisdom, decided that this bomber was a disgruntled white male like Richard Jewell, just like they decided that the 2002 DC sniper was a white male, probably a white nationalist, turned out to be 2 gay black Muslims. But just outrageous what our elite institutions, meaning law enforcement and the news media, did to Richard Jewell, because he was an overweight white man, a Christian who liked to go hunting and happened to live with his mother. So they thought they could that he just definitely that fits the profile for a bomber.
Not to defend our current regime, but to be fair, I could see the initial thought process of maybe he was some nut for attention, so he planted a bomb and then pretended to be the one who found it to like get credit and to be a hero. I could see the thought process playing out, but certainly they shouldn't have just jumped at it with no evidence and put it all in the media like that. I mean, that's definitely not your standard protocol. Certainly not for local law enforcement. I'm sure that it's not what the FBI is supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. So when you look back on your live streaming career, what are some of the highlights that come to mind? I mean, we've all had a lot of good laughs. We've had a lot of good debates just between the 2 of us. But you've been on many shows. So in ways that don't violate YouTube's terms of service, could you tell me what comes to mind when you think about your live streaming highlights?
The interviews with Tan Stoffel were really cool. Interviews with Billy Roper. Recently did a New Year's year in review show, big panel show with Billy Roper on it. That was cool. Those are always fun. The bigger shows with guests definitely get more attention. And I mean, obviously, there's just been a lot of funny shows along the way. Lots of debate shows.
I'm thinking about the time you confronted Frame Game Radio. That was peak.
That was a fun time. That clip is still floating around out there. People can still find that clip. Actually, Mustapha has it on BitChute.
Yeah, I played it on my channel because shortly thereafter, Frame Game went incognito. You appear to have bullied Frame Game Radio off the internet.
Yeah, I certainly like to take credit for it. Obviously, we don't know what was going on in his personal life, but it does appear that the way I understand how the events played out was I had my confrontation with him. He did not handle it well. He went on JF the day after, or maybe the day after that, and some people that didn't like how he didn't really respond well to me, I guess confronted him in the chat, and he got a wrench from JF and started banning people, and people got more mad, and ultimately, like a week after, is when he finally just quit the internet. So it was a combination of the interaction with me, and then also kind of the mask fell, and he just didn't handle it well, and he got a lot of backlash.
Yeah. Wow. And are you still doing the going out into the park with a bullhorn thing?
No, I did that one time, but it's probably just not a viable activism strategy for me where I'm at, just on foot. Nothing happened. Actually, I was surprised. I went to a park not too far from where I live, but it's kind of the Skid Row Park. So even though there were lots of people in the park, no one seemed to pay any attention to the fact I was yelling about demographics on a bullhorn. But still, I thought, I live in a pretty heavy Antifa area. It's probably not safe. The main form of IRL activism I do now is I do the stickers. Stickers are much safer, quicker, effective. I can go in under 20 minutes, just do a whole radius around where I live and put up 15, 20 of them.
And, wow. And, okay, so what else has been going on for you in 2019? You're still living in the same area?
Yeah, I'm still living in the same building.
And how are you getting on with your neighbors? Any of them want to discuss politics with you?
No, I don't engage with any of the people that live in this building. I keep my head down. I'm polite to everyone I have to interact with, like on the elevator. But no, I make a conscious effort not to interact with anyone in this building, even the white people.
Yeah, that's very smart. And what about your pagan adventures? You used to go to various pagan rituals. What's going on with that life?
I'm still a member of a group. We still do pretty regular things, usually monthly. That's pretty much all the same.
Okay, and what are the best books that you've read in 2019 that you can discuss on YouTube?
Oh, well, one book from Yahweh to Zion, I can't get into the detail other than that it's a book on the history of Jews. That's a good one. Also, The Bible Unearthed by Finkelstein, and I can't see it to get the other name, but it was actually two Israeli historians and archaeologists that wrote that. Another book on the history of Israel. That's actually something I'm getting into researching, is kind of the history of this. I don't know, this is kind of more in the biblical criticism area, so I assume this goes under something YouTube would allow. It appears that a lot of the stories in the Old Testament were kind of post hoc retcons that were written long after the events were supposed to have occurred, and conflated different events, conflated what was originally like pagan Sumerian mythology with Israelite history. And there's actually a whole theory that the unified kingdom never existed, that Israel and Judah were always separate kingdoms and really had nothing to do with each other religiously or culturally. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I am a little bit. So can you run by me again the name of the book by the two Israeli academics?
The Bible Unearthed.
Bible Unearthed. Okay. So the Bible Unearthed on Amazon.com. Okay, the Bible Unearthed: Archaeology's New Vision of Ancient Israel and the Origin of its Sacred Texts. It's received extraordinary ratings on Amazon.com. This iconoclastic and provocative work, leading scholars Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman draw on recent archaeological research to present a dramatically revised portrait of ancient Israel and its neighbors. They argue that crucial evidence at digs in Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon suggests that many of the most famous stories in the Bible, the wanderings of the patriarchs, the exodus from Egypt, Joshua's conquest of Canaan, and David and Solomon's vast empire, reflect the world of the later authors rather than actual historical facts. So, do you have a new interest in the historicity or lack thereof in the Bible, or has this been a long time interest?
Well, I've always had some interest. You know, I years ago I got into the whole, Jesus myth, the idea he didn't exist, and then from Red Ice I encountered the idea of, maybe Moses didn't exist. So it's something that's always interested me. I'm looking into it now to maybe understand some other issues that we can't talk about here on your stream. Yeah. But yeah, it is a current thing that I'm looking into, the history of the people we would call Jews today, and their links to groups like the Hyksos, the Sashu, Habaru, these various ancient groups in the Middle East.
Is there any monotheist religion for which you have some affection, at least?
Generally, no. The closest would be Zoroastrianism, which is actually basically an inversion, a heresy of Aryan religion, Indo-European religion. But otherwise, no. None of the Abrahamic ones, certainly not.
Mm-hmm. And how has your thinking evolved in the past year in ways that can be discussed on YouTube? Have you refined or changed any of your fundamental points of view?
Not to any significant degree. I've certainly taken a bit more interest. Well, I've always had some interest, but I've definitely looked more at politics and genetics and subjects like that. There's a channel, Edward Dutton. I watch a lot of his stuff. We can't really discuss a lot of what he talks about, but I catch most of his streams. I find his stuff very fascinating. I read his one book, How to Judge People by What They Look Like, and I plan to pick up a couple of the others.
Wow.
You actually interviewed him when
Yes,
he first got started,
twice.
correct?
Yeah, I interviewed him twice on this channel, so yeah, I enjoy him too. What other YouTube channels do you enjoy?
Survive the Jive is always good. Dave Martell is doing some good shows on Also True, White Rabbit Radio TV, or no, it's White Rabbit Radio. Yeah, White Rabbit Radio TV now is good.
And what are your favorite channels on BitChute?
BitChute, I watch Handsome Truth. I do occasionally watch Sinead McCarthy's channel. And then most of the others are just channels that also either were recently on YouTube and only recently kicked off, or channels that are still up on YouTube, but I have them saved on BitChute as a backup.
So are you more or less or equally... Are you more or less optimistic about your side in these competitions between various groups? So we won't get too specific, but are you more or less optimistic in the way you view the world now compared to a year ago?
I'm still very optimistic. Certainly, certain things on the political side have slowed down to some degree with the censorship, but it does seem like the general trend is still towards white resentment of what is occurring. That is still growing. And then there are just larger meta trends. I mean, the birth rates, I don't know to what degree we can get into that, but yes, while the overall white birth rate is low, if you break that into subcategories, white conservatives actually have a fairly high birth rate. Some categories like Mormon or evangelical actually have a higher birth rate than Hispanics. And Hispanics, when they come to this country, the first immigrant generation has a high birth rate, I believe maybe the second, but by the third, it drops down to as low as your typical secular white Americans. So there are trends that are definitely working in our favor. I don't know if you've watched it, but Alt Hype did a video about this a while. It wasn't specifically on this topic, but he mentioned that whites actually as a group are becoming more ethnocentric because of selective birth rates.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's your primary source of news? Is it the New York Times? Is it CNN? What is it?
I like Gab Trends. Gab Trends is a good way to just scan through and get an idea of where the current memetics are, what's the big narrative today they're pushing. I also like Voice of Europe to see what's going on over in the homeland.
And are there any news stories in 2019 that you regard as highly significant?
There were a couple incidents in 2019 that I thought will reverberate. There was the, I won't remember the girl's name, and that makes me feel terrible, but there was Tessa, the murder of Tessa in New York. I thought that was one that actually it got.
Oh yeah, the 18-year-old from Columbia University who was murdered in a park.
Yep, that got quite a little bit of attention, more than I was expecting, considering the circumstances. And I think that based on some of the comments I saw on even some mainstream websites, I think that is definitely going to drive some white people in, in the right direction, so to speak.
And how are you doing with all the feuding that seems endemic on the dissident right? People are constantly falling out with each other. What's your status with regard to feuding?
I'm not really involved in much of it. It seems like, for the large part, what I've noticed, there isn't a lot of active feuding right now. It seems like everyone's kind of broken off into camps. TRS is doing their thing. Daily Stormer's doing their thing. Richard Spencer's doing whatever he's doing. There are always going to be people like the gas station and kind of the Bull Patrol crowd that always want to talk shit about everyone else and call everyone else movementarians or what's the other one? Grifters. But
Yes.
I mean, that's just always been part of the movement. There's always going to be people that, kind of have this crab bucket mentality and just kind of want to sit around and complain about what other people in the cause are doing.
And how much attention do you pay to TRS?
I still listen to their 2 free shows a week. The main show, TDS. I was behind the paywall for a while. I left the paywall after some questionable decisions platforming certain people. Mark Brahman is why I left. And then when I was thinking about going back, then they platformed E. Michael Jones. So I've stayed away. I may wind up going back behind the paywall because of all the major groups. They're not a group, but you know what I mean. They are probably one of my favorite. So I may go back behind the paywall. I was really resentful of platforming certain individuals, and particularly E. Michael Jones, because of some of what he says. I feel like take what he says about a certain group of people out of the equation. E. Michael Jones is essentially an anti-white leftist.
And what's your critique of Mark Brahman?
Mark Brahman is basically just a quack. His whole shtick is basically that particular group of people invented everything, including indigenous European religion. He claims that Odin was a god that was invented by the bankers. So yeah, I have no respect for Mark Brahman. Nothing he says is supported by any archaeological evidence, any written sources, any common sense. He's a quack he's got an audience because he's friends with Richard Spencer.
Do you follow any sports?
No, I don't.
What's your critique of Mike Enoch?
I think Mike Enoch is doing good work. I think that, the situation a couple years ago transpired. It was rocky, but I think so far he's pulled back. He's come back from that. And overall, I say he's a net positive for the movement.
And Eric Stryker.
Eric Stryker does good work. I like a lot of what he says. Some things I disagree with. I think he goes a bit overboard on kind of the economic leftism, why I'm certainly not a libertarian or propertarian by any stretch of the imagination. I think maybe he hasn't totally left behind some of his communist priors. So sometimes he's a little bit much with that. But otherwise, I think Stryker's an intelligent speaker.
So JF Garapi and Richard Spencer have come out in support for Bernie, the socialist, because they see him as authentic and they're tired of Trump's lies. Any thoughts on alt-righters supporting Bernie Sanders, the Jewish communist?
I think it's very foolish. I mean, yes, odds are he won't win, so I get that they're kind of doing it just comedically, sort of like how everyone got behind Gabbard or got behind Andrew Yang. It's just kind of a meme, a troll. And I don't think Bernie will win. I don't think Bernie would be allowed to get into office for a number of reasons. Mainly that he's of a certain group, and that would be very bad optics. But I don't think it's wise. If Bernie were to win, which is unlikely, but if he were to win, if he were allowed to get into office, if they decided they were ready to just go that road, that they were done with America and ready to burn it down, it would be very unpleasant. It would be unpleasant for everyone, but especially unpleasant for people in me and Spencer and JF's kind of sphere of thinking.
What do you think about Trump's advisor, Stephen Miller, the immigration hawk?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Stephen Miller. I know for a long time he had his supporters because of some of the things he said. But to me, we can look at what's happened so far, and largely nothing's happened, and we can point the fingers at different people. But ultimately, as a whole, I don't think any of his advisors are actually moving him towards what he actually ran on.
And do you have a favorite Jew?
Do I have a favorite Jew? No, not particularly. I guess the closest would be Bobby Fischer.
And would you like to see Trump reelected?
Considering that all the other options are blatant anti-whites whose literal campaign position is we're going to put Norvin Hobbs in jail. Well, I mean, not specifically me, but that's basically what they're running on is locking up white nationalists. Yeah, I guess Trump is the best of all horrible options. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard would probably in some ways be better than Trump, but Tulsi Gabbard realistically has no chance. So yeah, I will probably drag myself to the office to vote for Trump again, just because I don't want to wind up in jail.
Question from the chat: has Norvin ever gone and hung around different groups to get to know them to see if he really should hate them?
I live in a multiracial city. I went to majority non-white schools. I live in a low-income housing building. Wait, do they mean other groups in general, like other races, or do they mean that one particular group?
I think they mean other groups in general, not one particular.
Yeah, well,
that must not
in
be
general,
named.
I've been around other groups a lot. As a low-income person in a multiracial city, that's 90% of who I deal with. I don't have the pleasure of interacting with my fellow white people that often, and I mean my actual fellow white people.
And what's it like when you go to a doctor's office?
Luckily, because of my condition, I have to see a cardiologist specialist, so it's mostly white. Occasionally you get an Asian or an Indian, but I don't have to go to I don't see any MDs. I don't see any regular doctors, general practitioners. A, because I want to avoid the diversity issue, and B, with my condition, they're liable to screw something up with my medication. So yeah, luckily I just see a cardiologist. So it's a higher caliber that gets into that level.
And do you intend to get a haircut?
No, I do not intend to get a haircut. I may get a keratin treatment to get rid of a curl because I know there are people that say my hair makes me look Jewish.
And are your doctors white?
Yes, my current cardiologist is white.
Do you have any favorite non-white groups?
Favorite non-white groups? That's an interesting question. I mean, I guess we could just scale them out in terms of IQ and how high or low they are.
Japanese and Chinese would be among your favorite non-white groups.
Probably in actuality to deal with. I mean, I do admire some of Native American spirituality, but I also realize that a lot of that is white liberals kind of fantasizing and fetishizing. A lot of that is not real. So yeah, if I had to actually pick a non-white group to be surrounded by, it would probably be Northeast Asians because they're high IQ and less prone to violent crime.
What's your critique of Nicholas Fuentes?
I have religious issues with Nick. I'm skeptical of someone of his heritage holding a leading position in, the pro-white circle. I don't like that. Also just generally don't like his personality, but that's not really a valid critique. I mean, lots of people don't like certain people's personalities. But yeah, that's basically my main issues are the religion issue and the fact he wants to make a big deal of that. And then, like I said, I question his heritage. Is he the guy to really be like the guy, the leader? That seems like that's become a non-issue because after the Catboy incident, it seems like most of his own audience has turned on him.
What do you think of Catboys?
I think it's degenerate.
What do you think of Groypers?
Groyper is just a knockoff of Pepe. Oh, you mean the people, the Groypers, like the activism?
Yeah.
I thought it was good. I liked it. I'm always happy to see people go out and doing IRL activism. It's always funny to see someone like Charlie Kirk get made a fool of. Again, I'm not a fan of Fuentes, so I didn't like that Fuentes kind of got the credit for this. And to some extent, oddly enough, E. Michael Jones got to take a little bit of credit for this. But I thought overall it was a positive event, a series of events.
And is there anything in particular that you are looking forward to in 2020?
Well, I think the political song and dance with the election will be amusing. I am curious to watch how a certain trend is unfolding. I'll be careful how I phrase this. I'm sure you're aware and have spoken of some of the events that transpired last year in New York and was it Chicago with African Americans and Jewish Americans maybe no longer getting along so well.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see how the Jewish community chooses to handle that, because obviously they want to protect themselves, but they don't accidentally want to actually feed white racial sentiment. So I think it could actually be a very amusing thing to watch and could be a point of tension for them. I saw one clip of Fox News, I believe it was Hannity, had a rabbi on who basically said that Trump needs to come into New York, take over the mayor's office, put the feds in charge of the New York City Police Department, and basically crack down like Judge Dredd style to protect the Orthodox community.
Who are your favorite pagan gods?
Thor. Thor is my primary deity.
And do you talk to him, and does he talk to you?
I pray, but no, I don't hear voices.
And what's the story between you and OV?
OV, well, to the extent I can talk about this issue, because, you know, with the restrictions about what can be said, OV wanted to promote a kind of weird, like, kosher nationalism or Zionist nationalism. This idea that white nationalists and Zionists could be allies. He was really hell-bent on promoting that, even to the point on a totally separate discussion. We were having a debate, and we had Billy Roper on to discuss balkanization, which actually is another issue I have with Fuentes, because he's kind of into the idea of taking all of America back. But anyway, we were talking balkanization, and we did kind of get on to what countries, if America started to break apart, what countries might be willing to ally or fund white separatist aspect of that breaking apart. And OB immediately wanted to then push this whole discussion about how Zionists are natural allies. And it kind of derailed the whole discussion for like half an hour. And it was just very obnoxious. And that was kind of the end of my relationship with OB, because A, I disagree with that position, and B, I just thought that was very inappropriate to kind of derail and turn it into a "are there good Jews" kind of argument.
Now, I've noticed that much of the 1488 crowd is on disability, and therefore they don't have to work a regular job, which would have like a moderating effect on their opinions. So, and I realize this is very personal, and I certainly don't want to try to diminish you and what you're going through. But I'm just wondering, do you have any reflections on how being on disability allows one to state one's views perhaps with more freedom than if one had a 40-hour-a-week job at a corporate office?
Well, certainly not having to worry about getting fired allows more freedom. To my knowledge, I mean, I may be the only one who's just willing to admit I'm on disability, but I haven't really encountered anyone else that's on disability. I've actually promoted the idea that people should consider doing that, consider getting on food stamps. Me and a buddy, Gregory Maltrup, who you've also spoken to, we actually promoted the idea of welfare nationalism.
Right. Are there any downsides to that? Because someone who's got, say, a regular job, on the one hand, they can't be as pure, but on the other hand, they have to be more in touch with, what other people think, and perhaps more in touch with reality, as opposed to pure beliefs.
Well, I think you can always, even without working directly in the normie sphere, maintain some idea of where normies are at. I mean, I do pay attention. I watch the news. I watch the normie news. I don't watch it, but, I read it online. I love to read comment sections and see where the general discussion seems to be at. You know, when I go to YouTube, I see the main page. I'll click on movie trailers, read through the comments. So I try to maintain some idea of where the average person is at. Depending, I mean, everyone has a limited perspective. Someone who works a job in a particular socioeconomic sphere is going to have a different perspective than someone across the country on a different economic run of the ladder anyway. So, I mean, we're all going to have limited perspectives about the world around us.
Did you see the series or read the book, The Man in the High Castle?
No, I did not. I am familiar with it. I've seen a lot of the memes and clips from it, but no, I could not bring myself to watch it or read the books.
There was a very dedicated Nazi youth in the book who intentionally had himself euthanized because he had genetic problems, and so he said, I do not want to become a useless eater. And so even though his parents wanted to protect him and send him away to South America, he volunteered to essentially to be euthanized, because in the state portrayed in The Man in the High Castle that people with certain genetic diseases are euthanized. Do you have any thoughts on the state using euthanasia on people such as yourself? And I apologize for being so brutal.
No, there's no problem with that. Obviously, I'm not going to volunteer for anything like that under the current paradigm with the demographics they are, or way we are. If we were in a white ethno state, that would be a different discussion. I don't know if euthanizing people is necessarily the best option. I have advocated for sterilizing people and putting them on welfare, just as kind of a compensation thing. It's like, look, for the good of the race, we don't want you breeding, so we're gonna sterilize you, but we'll give you a check, and you can just hang around and not have to work. I think that would probably be a more humane and agreeable way to do it. But I certainly agree that the stock should be improved upon. Some people that are totally non-functional, yeah, probably need to be euthanized.
Whoa, disavow, YouTube, disavow. Question from the chat. What are Norvin's favorite hamburger toppings?
What was that?
What are Norvin's favorite hamburger toppings? Do you like caramelized onions?
No, I do not like caramelized onions. I don't like a burger to be sweet. Obviously, I prefer a cheeseburger over a regular hamburger. Other than that, basically plain toppings, mustard, ketchup, mayonnaise, things like that. I don't like bacon on my cheeseburger either, but that might just be because most fast food burgers, they don't use good quality bacon.
Yeah, let me play something.
Like a fucking 100 times. I am so mad. I am so fucking mad at these people. They don't do this to fucking me. We're gonna fucking ritualistically humiliate them. I am coming back here every fucking weekend if I have to. Like, this is never over. I win, they fucking lose. That's how the world fucking works. Little fucking kikes. They get ruled by people like me. Little fucking octoroons. My ancestors fucking enslaved those pieces of fucking shit. I rule the fucking world. Those pieces of shit get ruled by people like me. They look up and see a face like mine looking down at them. That's how the fucking world works. We are gonna destroy this fucking town.
Any thoughts on that Richard Spencer outburst after Charlottesville?
Yeah, I'm gonna need to do a hard disavow on that. Spencer was drunk. He is also a bit of a rich, pompous guy. That's just the way he is. Obviously, my attitudes, I'm not a supremacist. I don't believe we should be ruling over people. And I imagine Spencer, well, actually, I don't know. Spencer has said some things in favor of imperialism and the idea of maybe whites, it is better if we quote unquote stew it over other people. Yeah, I don't agree with what Spencer said there, but at the same time, he was also drunk, and it was right after the Charlottesville incident. So some of it could be excused as just an emotional outburst, but some of it may reflect his more imperialistic views.
Yeah. Do Do you have any thoughts on cocaine? Good idea, bad idea?
Cocaine is a bad idea.
What about meth? Crystal meth?
Meth is the worst idea.
Heroin?
That's getting worse too.
Okay. Let me play, as I had some other questions, but then I just started to blank on them. Let me play one other clip here.
That's how the fucking world works!
Then put
We
it
were gonna
together.
destroy this fucking town!
Said this. The way that I responded here is to say that I'll just read it directly. I said, I've thought about that a lot, actually, and here's my answer.
You are not my target audience. I like you guys. I respect your struggle, your journey, everything you have to go through along the way. I hope you keep watching my content and it makes you a little better or more well-rounded. You guys listening to me is like me listening to Murdoch. When a new Murdoch episode comes out, I stop whatever I'm doing pretty much and watch it. I'm not Murdoch's target audience. I disagree with 90% of the show's message. But that other 10% is so tremendously powerful, unique, and artistic that I always come out the other side of it having learned something or having my worldview colored in some way by the presentation and thoroughly entertained in the process. So we're in different movements, but there's some overlap. I just want to promote, I do not want to live in a world where my grandkids are taught white toxicity. And if you're telling me I need to just shut the fuck up for the rest of my life because any attempt to promote white positivity is stepping on the turf of white nationalists, I'm just going to keep doing my thing. Like, that's just what I'm going to keep doing.
Authentic to myself.
We're coming back here like a fucking 100 times. I am so mad. I am so fucking mad at these people. They don't do this to fucking me.
Hold on a second. You're saying because I've just espoused my individual beliefs that I have demanded people in nationalist movements to like confer some blessing on Jews. And I mean, have you, dude? Do you even watch my shit?
We're gonna fucking ritualistically humiliate them. I am coming back here every fucking weekend if I have to. Like this is never over. I win. They fucking lose.
Okay, listen, man. I gotta say, you sound extremely knee-jerk reactionary about this whole thing. I don't mind that you have your views, man. I'm not trying to step on your toes. I hope that you're producing content and like really putting in work and really trying to make the world a better place. I salute you and support you to the extent that you're doing that. But hey, man, that's not me. We're in different movements.
That's how the world fucking works. Little fucking they get ruled by people like me.
Dude, you haven't earned my respect yet. Like, you haven't said anything. Everything you're saying is so fucking basic. Look, I'm sorry to bring out curse words like this, but I wasn't in the mood for this tonight, and I'm happy to go in a toe-for-toe in a slam dunk contest over this, but you're really putting me on the spot here.
My ancestors fucking enslaved those pieces of fucking shit.
I have an anthropological question that I'm interested in. If you could cause harm to me or to my channels or to my production because you think I'm a net negative, would you take that action to shut me down?
I rule the fucking world. Those pieces of shit get ruled by people like me. They look up and see a face like mine looking down at them.
Taste in my mouth because, well, whatever. I don't mind it, man. Best of luck to you, man.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Norvin. We'll talk later, okay?
All right, later.
All right.
In a while since I've listened to that, it's very amusing to hear how he's so obviously uncomfortable and hot under the collar, and how he, on one hand, he's trying to maintain his composure and his image as, you know, this high intellectual type individual, but he clearly is very, very emotional. You can hear it in his voice and that.
And what's your status with Brundlefly these days?
I don't really interact with Brundlefly much. I mean, we're no better or worse than we were. He got doxxed a while back, so he's kind of laying low. Obviously, most of the people I interact with aren't fans of Brundlefly. Yeah, like I said, it's been a few weeks since I talked to him.
And what are Norvin's thoughts on Nietzsche?
Nietzsche? I think he had some valid critiques of Christianity. I think some of what he said on morality was good. He was still coming from kind of an atheistic perspective, so I don't totally agree with his whole framework, but I certainly believe Nietzsche was moving in the right direction.
And who do you think killed JFK?
The Israel lobby.
Whoa, disavow. And do you think that 9/11 was an inside job?
No, I don't think it was an inside job in the way that most people mean that. I basically same answer as the JFK thing.
Okay, and how do you understand, say, an Anglo-Saxon who converts to Orthodox Judaism? What's your take? What's the psychology there?
The psychology there, there's a lot of things going on. Probably some self-hatred, probably some ethnomasochism, maybe too much learning about the old Holocaust. Definitely maybe too much of a Protestant fixation on the Old Testament growing up in childhood. Maybe just a pragmatic desire to join the winning team.
Okay, Norvin, it's great to talk to you again. Do you have any final words?
No, it's been good speaking to you, though. Always enjoy it, Luke.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Norvin. Okay, guys, I think I'm going to wrap things up for tonight, but let me just be clear. I am so glad. I'm so glad for you people. I mean, think of all the lives that have been saved by this minion. Think about all the souls that have been brought closer to the Ribono Shel Olam. Think about all the people who've gotten clean in this minion of ours. Think about all the Jews who now keep Shabbos and Kashrut and Taharas Mishpacha. Think about all the Goyim who've learned about the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. Think about the Jews and the Goyim who've learned the lessons of the Holocaust through these streams. Think about how if you save one Jewish life, you've saved a whole world, because to that Jew, his life is the whole world. But folks, my work here is not yet done. I have in mind a chain of yeshivas for Goyim to teach them how to survive as a distinct people in a multicultural world. I want to open up base yakos for shiksas for fallen women so that they can learn an honest trade and become dutiful, obedient, faithful wives. I have a dream. We can penetrate the darkest places online and combat anti-Semitism, racism, and the rankest prejudice. But to do that, I need your help. If the Lord so moves you, then you can hit up my PayPal. lukeisback@gmail.com. God bless. Good night, everyone.